Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast on Prince here on Podcast Juice. My name is Michael Dean. Sometimes I always say we have a legend in the building. We have a special episode. Well, this is one of those. This is a super special one. We are honored today to have one of the legends in the game, particularly of audio and production and in the music industry. And before I introduce him, salute to Big Sexy and Saxer. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm flattered that you would call me a legend, but
hilarious.
I'm doing all right.
You're a local legend. How about that?
I'll take that.
But ladies and gentlemen, give us a virtual round of applause. We have Mr. Bernie Grundman in the house. Bernie, sir, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm glad to be here. Always interested to talk about Prince.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. Right. Well, we're interested to talk about you. Listen, for a lot of us from back, and I'm one of these old school cats who used to go to the record store as a kid and go pick up the new, whatever was new. I would go to Tower Records every Friday and pick up whatever came out. And of course, it was Enter Prince, among other groups. But one of the things we always used to do is we would read those liner notes like they were like scriptures out of the Bible. Like we was like, okay, yeah, we're going to play the record, but pull the insert out. We're going to read the credits, blah, blah, blah. And you would always see this name, Mastering by Bernie Grundman. And I was like, man, who is that? And then I look at other albums I'd see, he on this one too. Like, and for us as kids, that was like, how is he on the Michael Jackson record? And then how is he on Prince? It was like, those are crossing over. How is he crossing over? These are whole different worlds, not understanding that whole process. But we would always see your name. And so then we start to research and like, okay, what is mastering? And for me personally, that got me into going to the studio and doing my own records, but actually going in there and, 2-inch tape, half-inch tape, and this and that and the third, and understanding, this is what mastering is. I had no idea. So, sir, before we just lay it out, and because you've done all this great works that you've touched, can you just explain to the layman, the fan, like what is mastering?
Yeah, well, that is a question that comes up a lot. In fact, it used to be this thing whenever they would introduce me, they would say, well, this is that area that's really mysterious. We don't really understand what goes on, but boy, it can be a lot different when it comes out of there, but we don't know what they're doing. And now it's not quite as big a mystery, but I mean, when it really comes down to it, you really can work in many different types of music. Especially because of what music really is. Because music is an emotional kind of expression of whoever's making the music, of their point of view. And it's really, everybody's really the same in that pursuit in a way. It doesn't matter if it's polka music. They're just trying to express the same emotions that we all have. We all have the exact same emotions. Artists and musicians and singers or whatever, they're trying to portray those emotions through music. Now, they might have different ways of doing it. It might be hip hop, it might be rap, it might be R&B, it might be middle of the road, doesn't matter. I mean, it all is what it comes down to. It all tends to be an emotional expression that you're trying to portray and have somebody see your point of view. See, that's what's interesting too. It's your point of view of that same emotion, and it enriches you to be able to hear other people exciting that kind of emotion or speaking to you in whatever emotion they're trying to talk to you in. So some people are just better at it than others. Like people like Prince, it's the kind of thing where you put something like that on and right away it connects emotionally with you. It's more direct in an interesting way because I think there's just some kind of other insight there that some of the great, great, great artists have. But but they're all really trying to get to the same place. They're all trying to, and I'm trying to help them get an easier, more direct a connection so that music is easy for the listener to connect with. So that's what mastering does. Mastering is trying to even heighten the experience so that that when somebody plays that person's record, it's easy for them to connect and feel what's going on and get the message, the emotional message that's there. So that's what my job is. And, my background is really ironic that I have a big reputation in rock or whatever. I do rock stuff. I do hard metal. I do a lot of things. I have certain preferences, but, being in this business so long, I've come all the way from being a real snob. At one time, I was in the beatnik period. I was a bebop jazz guy.
Mm.
I was into jazz and so forth, and classical and things like that, but kind of esoteric things. And so at one time, way back when I was a teenager, I was, I always thought, pop music I wasn't as interested in.
Mm-hmm.
But, and when you're a teenager, you know everything.
Right.
So, so I've come a long way through the years, being exposed to all these different kinds of music. I've come a long way in realizing that it all has a place. I mean, even, and it all, whatever they're trying to do, if it's elevator music, when I'm in an elevator, I don't want to have to think too much. I want something maybe soothing. I want something very schmaltzy, maybe. It's all right. And if somebody who did that elevator music really believed in it, you're going to respond to it it might not be a deep experience, but you respond to it in the way they want you to. Same way with dance music. They're working for just one thing, to get you up and boogie and carry on and at a party or whatever. And the guys that believe in it really come out with stuff that makes you want to jump up and dance. And because you're not going to put a piece of classical music on at a party. You're going to put on something that makes people want to move. So, I mean, all this music has a place. It's just that, there are some people that just do it better than others. And Prince is definitely one of those.
Man, let me ask you a question. You just said something that was really interesting, and I was watching an interview you did online last night, just kind of researching you. But the whole thing of being sort of a music snob, or being particular to a particular style of music. In your case, you were saying jazz and things of that nature. And just to throw out there, you've done stuff like Steely Dan. These are the classic albums. Thriller, of course, Purple Rain. Herb Alpert, Carpenters, all the way till you get to something like Dr. Dre's The Chronic. I mean, just such a wide, vast, thing there. But what was, and just to go back to that whole prejudice part, like if you were really into jazz music, and then here's like, what was the album that came to you that you were like, before you heard it, and you were like, I don't like that type of music, like, do you remember, was there an album where you kind of was like, you know what? Okay, I understand. Like, as you said, all of these genres have a place in the human emotion, and now I get it. Is there a point that you started to realize that?
Well, I think even when I was a teenager and so forth, it was kind of the birth of all of this, of rock and so forth. And I think some of the things that started coming through to me actually were the more R&B oriented stuff. Now, and that makes sense because, when you go to get into bebop jazz, it's a lot about feel. And the only thing about it is, though, with bebop jazz, it's a long emotional story, because jazz is all about improvising. So it's like a abstraction of the tune that takes you on a all expanded view of that tune. And if you're a good player, you don't lose sight of that tune, but you take people on an abstract trip that gives you a tremendous number of points of view of how to look at that tune. And you practically recompose the tune within that same tune. Now, pop music is a little more decided ahead of time. It's like the writer and the arranger and all these people actually do a lot of that, in a sense, improvising. And then the singer, of course, puts their twist on things. And there's jazz in almost everything. Mm-hmm. So you take some of these R&B tunes that were coming out in the late 50s and so forth. they all contain, like if you're singing a song and you just bend a note a little bit, that's jazz, because you're improvising in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a big explorative thing, but it definitely impinges on jazz. So I mean, the jazz is a lot at the basis of almost all music. I think it has a lot to do with it, because jazz was also tapping into that fundamental human emotions.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not sure what some of the records were that really did it for me, but I think it probably happened more in the mid '60s, when I finally got to Hollywood and I started doing a big variety of things when I first started mastering. And you know, I started hearing some more middle of the road stuff, like all that stuff with Dionne Warwick. Do you know the way to San Jose? All those tunes and stuff like that she did that were Burt Bacharach tunes,
Okay.
or even the really simple stuff that Herb Alpert did. It's like Businessman's Bounce, but it had a nice feel. It didn't have a lot of guts to it in a way, but then when you got into R&B, it really, to me, it's easy for me to adapt to R&B or things like Prince or things like Michael, because I mean, that's really close to what I raised myself on, was jazz. I mean, it's very heavy on feel. And that's where Prince was outstanding, especially on the first 4 or 5 albums. I mean, with Sheila E. and people like that. I mean, those albums had a fantastic rhythmic feel, and that really got me. That stuff is special, and I'm not sure how you get it, but they have it.
So just to jump into the Prince thing real quick, you worked on his first. Did you work on his first
Yes,
3 or 4
I did.
albums?
I did his first album, the one that wasn't a hit.
For you.
Yeah, that one. It was the second album that put him on the map.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the progression exact, what the names of them are. I don't even remember. But I know the first album, that was the first time I met Prince and the first project that I did with him. And it just didn't do well. But the second one, it exploded. And, but I never know. In fact, I'll hear a lot of things that I think are fantastic, but they just don't make it. And I don't know why. It's like promotion, maybe, certain aspects of it, not enough payola. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But I mean, there is that aspect, but, some of that happens in the industry. But the thing is, if you're as good as Prince, it's only a matter of time and you're going to get recognized.
Okay.
And because it was really obvious that this guy had something really unique, special, different than most people. In fact, he was different than most people that I worked with.
What was your what did you think of him when you first met him? And I'm curious how that process works. Does he come with you with the finished, piece of work, and does he sit in the studio while you do this? Or
well, they do. No, now Michael Jackson didn't. I did, in fact, even Thriller, I did all on my own.
Really?
Because the engineer is a good friend of mine. I've done a lot of work for him, Bruce Swedin. And, and sometimes he would attend and we would work on it together. But they've kind of left a lot of that to me. And but it's always done with a, we always have to interface with each other, though. We have to make sure that we're on the same wavelength, and we have to make a test cut or test masterings, and give it to the artist and the engineer or whoever's involved, in the producer. I need to know if I'm going in the right direction, because I can make things go way off in another direction, and it doesn't even mean that it's wrong, but it doesn't service their dream. And so what my job is a lot of times is to get on their wavelength, actually, and enhance what they're doing and make it a much more effective experience for the listener. I want that to communicate, the emotional part of the music to communicate with people. And sometimes I can go too far. I can make it too aggressive, and maybe they want it a little more romantic. So that's fine, but I can manipulate the sound quite a bit. And so I can really change the feeling of it. I mean, I've had things like that happen to me, and it humbles you in a way, because I remember at A&M when I was doing things, sometimes I would do things that were a little bit more ballad oriented, but I would make them just as an audiophile record, real clear and clean and detailed and everything jumping out at you. And I remember even Herb Alpert, he called me in his office. He said, boy, he says, it sounds good, but that's not the feeling I wanted. And I went, uh-oh, so this, and it taught me a lesson that, wait a minute, it's not only about me, and it wasn't that it was wrong. It's just that he wanted to, it kind of like increase that feeling of romantic kind of spatial kind of not too clear sound. So it's really tricky sometimes but see, I've had a lot of experience now. I've been doing it so long that when I hear a type of music, I have a pretty good idea of what they're looking for, but I still really want to know what they think. Everybody I have to get an approval and so forth. And that's the way the industry works. We might work on an album and go over and over it and do little changes here and there. And then they have to sign off in the end that it's really as good as they think it can be. And I'm also in the same position. I think I've gotten the most out of it. So it is a joint effort.
Okay.
It's just like mixing. It's not just one person all the time. Mm-hmm. So it's but Prince definitely, he's one of those people that he's when he brought in stuff, he had it pretty close to the way he wanted it. And the one thing about Prince is, though, is he didn't want to be influenced by what other people thought in a way. He didn't like being in Los Angeles, and he didn't like being around the people in the record business and the A&R people and the promotion department and all these people that kind of tend a lot of times to influence you to do things in a certain way that they think will make it sell better. Mm-hmm. And Prince definitely was not that kind of person. He was very possessive of his art, and he did not want to be affected by these kind of commercial ideas. He had a vision, and I could feel that when I worked with him. Mm-hmm. And he would come in for one day, and he'd go right back to Minneapolis.
What kind of things would he? And I'm curious. So that sort of influence from the record company, does that ever sort of permeate its way to you? To like they're like saying, "Hey, we want these albums to kind of sound like this other stuff."
No. It's a producer's medium. It's not the A&R department. They can't tell me what to do.
Gotcha.
It all has to do with the artist and the producer, and in fact, they're pretty careful about that, because they know that if they have me change it from what the artist wants or what the producer wants, and especially if it doesn't do well, they can blame them. So they're cautious about. They always have been cautious about that. It's really up to the producer. Now, there are a few record executives that have a lot of power that do kind of influence a change in some of these recordings, but they still have to go through the artist and the producer. They can't tell me. I mean, I don't really answer to the A&R department or the promotion department or the record company. In a way, the people that hire me they pay for it, but it's really the producer and the artist that hire me. It's not the record company in a way.
So are you like a part of their budget, sort of the production?
I am part of the budget.
Okay, gotcha.
But it's all kind of controlled by, it's really a producer's medium, the whole thing. Now, sometimes it's an artist-producer, but still, it's a producer's medium. And it's and they're the last word. That for me, because I've seen fights before between the record company and the producer, but the producer's the one that calls up and makes the appointment with us, and we do the work for the producer and the artist. We're not, the record company's paying for it, but we're not really talking to the record company that much. And we've had, when they've gotten big disputes before, we've had big fights between the two where the record company wants to take it back and say, we paid for it, so we should be able to do what we want with it. And I'll say, well, yeah, but you didn't really hire us. We're trying to honor the producer and the artist. So you guys work it out. And until you guys work it out, we're not doing anything.
Mm. Wow. Okay.
And that's what I do. That's the way I handle it. I stop the project. I'll say, if you guys can't talk to each other and work this out, then I'm not going to do anything.
Man, how many times has that happened?
Well, not a lot of times, maybe 3-4 times, maybe 5 times over all this time, but it has happened.
Interesting.
And I'm not going to take sides.
Just remain neutral. I wanted to go back. Can I just ask you a Herb Alpert question? I'm going to assume that you know a lot of his music, or you've worked on probably a number.
I've done 35 of his albums.
Okay, to say no more. So let me say it this way: I'm not that versed in Herb Alpert. Now, the way I heard of Herb Alpert, and this may sound funny to you, and this would be a younger person's sort of way of saying it. I first heard of Herb Alpert, one, because I knew he owned A&M Records. And at the time I came around, Janet Jackson was very big. That was when she was coming out through A&M. And Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis produced the Herb Alpert album, Keep Your Eyes on Me. I think that's the name of the album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And which had a very, and I bought that album. Like that's the one and only Herb Alpert album I bought. And I know all the songs. It was a dope record. But I'm curious from your vantage point, and I assume you may have mastered that. I would imagine that was a very different album for Herb Alpert, because there's a lot of, at the time, contemporary R&B styling to it.
Herb has definitely gone through a lot of different changes through the years.
Okay.
And he's had other influences and stuff. He even had one where he did a duet with Hugh Masekela.
Really?
So, and Stuart Levine was involved in producing it. Hugh Masekela's producer. So, there's been a lot of variation with Herb, because he tries to reflect somewhat of what's going on in the industry. But he's one thing that he was able to accomplish way back. I think it was probably just in the late '60s or something, when he was really hot with his just Tijuana Brass stuff. Mm-hmm. He had 5 albums on the top 10 charts. Wow. on the top 100 albums. He had 5 on the top 10 simultaneously.
Incredible.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's funny.
He was so popular at one time. That's why he bought up most of Hollywood.
Yeah, I was looking up Herb Alpert a couple of weeks ago, just randomly, and I was just like, man, it's one of the guys I don't hear a lot about his name now, but he's one of those artists that is insanely popular.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like, man.
He had his period of time when he was, that was right around the time of, Brazil 66 and all of those, that kind of thing. He was kind of like, it's funny because it was kind of middle of the road stuff. It wasn't, he had Joe Cocker though. And he had some of those, he had some, and then he got to the Police, and the record company did. He wasn't doing that. But the record company was always kind of this, a little bit more, not quite as, I don't know, what would you say? It was a little more polished in a certain way. It wasn't quite as crude. It wasn't street music, It didn't have that kind of, he never went for extra funky stuff, but he did go for feel.
Okay.
So, he had that tune, Shout, was it? Was it Shout, the one that everybody dances to? It had a nice feel to it, but it wasn't real funky. So, it's just another point of view.
Okay. Well, shout out to Herb Alpert and A&M Records.
Oh yeah. Well, they were one of the biggest independents, along with Elektra. Yeah. Elektra was huge too. I did a lot of Elektra work too. At one time, because there weren't many of us that would actually manipulate the sound. See, mastering, when it comes right down to it, the fundamental word, when they used to say mastering engineer, that meant that you cut a master disc. That's all. You knew how to cut a master disc. You knew how to operate the equipment, but you did not manipulate the sound. So all through the 50s and into the early 60s, if you were a producer and you had an album all assembled on tape and you didn't like the third tune, you needed top end on it or something, they would send you back into the studio, because it was all within studios a lot of times. The mastering room was in with the Columbia Records or RCA or Capitol. They all did, it was all in-house, a lot of that stuff. And so you would have to go back in the studio, make a 1-to-1 or 2-to-2 transfer of the stereo tape with the EQ on it, put it in the assembly, give it to the mastering engineer, and the mastering engineer would cut it flat. So he had parameters. Singles were cut at this level, LPs were cut at this level, and long LPs were this level to make it fit, just so they knew about where it should be to make it fit on the disc. But the thing about me was I happened to get in right when it became a creative part of the industry, because I went to work first for Contemporary Records, which was a jazz label.
Okay.
And that label had a lot of custom things built so that they could manipulate the sound. Because when they did jazz records, if you did a direct-to-2 track, they were doing direct-to-2 track recordings and direct-to-mono, I think, at times, way back before I was there. But if things were a little off and the trumpet wasn't loud enough on the right side or whatever like that, they wanted to be able to manipulate the sound in mastering on the fly, right on the console, like we do now anyway. We can do that. But that's become a way that everybody works. But in those days, that was a new thing, and it was never open to the public until I went to work for Contemporary, and they were only maintaining their catalog. So he decided, Lester, the guy that owned it, decided to open the studio to custom work, other labels coming in and using the studio because they knew it was good quality. It was some of the best quality records ever made, and they still are considered that way, contemporary jazz records, the quality of them. So I started getting all of these people coming in because they wanted to manipulate the sound, and I could do it. So all of a sudden, I'm this special guy in town because nobody else would do it. And I could do all kinds of little tricks and things because they had some special equalizers and so on. So I was fortunate that way. I got in right on the ground floor. Now, fortunately, I had some ideas that helped a lot of times. These recordings, at least I had a musical sense, because I was always a huge listener.
Okay.
To all through my teenage years and so forth, I listened to. I had a sound system. I had 28 speakers in my bedroom when I was a teenager.
Whoa!
And that's back in the days. Yeah, 28 speakers.
I mean, there were cabinets that had like 14 in each cabinet or something like that. It was. So I was almost like out of a cartoon, you know. But I was pretty fanatic. That's pretty crazy. I even had a jazz club when I was 19.
Really?
Yeah, I was raised in Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
And I had an after-hours jazz club.
Wow.
And
I'm sure you got some stories to tell out of that camp.
with all the jazz musicians when I was like 18.
Oh boy.
And when I was 19, I opened a jazz club, because those coffee houses and after-hours places were popular then. So this friend of mine and I said, hey, let's do that.
Wow. Man.
And it was very successful.
What year was this? You know, about
this was in like the late 50s.
Okay. Wow. Man. So I know, just to going back to, well, one, you were telling us about when you sort of changed the dynamics of being able to manipulate the sound. Do you remember what year frame that was as well? Just for context.
That would be in 1966.
It's 1966. Okay.
That's when I first got to Hollywood, and my first job, I had worked at a studio in Phoenix, but just as setting up microphones and stuff. I'd worked for about not too long, maybe 6-8 months or something. Then I got this job at Contemporary, because I got to know the right people, and so forth. But then I was working with that system, the Contemporary system. So I learned a lot from the guy that owned the company, and he taught me a lot about how to deal with he kind of helped me see into the music and understand how to manipulate it with equalizers and so forth. So it was a big benefit for me to be right there at that time when a lot of different product was coming in, not just jazz, but to also manipulate that and see if I could get more out of it, make it a better recording. And so, uh, actually, I think I was pretty successful in a lot of areas, and I did develop this big reputation. And within 2 years, A&M hired me to run their mastering.
Wow!
Because I was doing a lot of work for Elektra and A&M, and Elektra was going to open their own mastering room too because they were building their first studio. But I was more connected with A&M. I knew more of the artists. I knew Herb real well. I knew a lot of people. I knew the engineers at Elektra, and they wanted me too. But I chose to go to A&M, and it was a great place to work. I mean, Herb is terrific. I mean, if I ever wanted to work for anyone again, those would be the people.
Okay. And we're going to go back. I know my listeners, we're going to get to some Prince stuff, but I'm just very fascinated about some of the processes here. And because I had a little experience with, I used to sell this, I used to sell like the Quantigy tape and all that, but I'm curious from your perspective, you're an engineer, what was the difference between going from working with reel-to-reel tapes and doing the sound that way to digital? Like, I don't know, was there a difference between going from vinyl to CD and then going to, the streaming and MP3 stuff? How are the dynamics in the sound changing from your perspective?
Well,
that's
of course,
it's
been a long, drawn-out process,
right?
Because there was always this misconception at the beginning, back in the early 80s, when digital really started to hit, when CDs started to hit, because they had the first digital machines and so forth, and it wasn't that great. It just wasn't as good. The converters weren't as good. It's been a process over many decades of trying to make digital kind of closer to what theoretically it should be. Because, there's a lot of electronics that's involved, and a lot of, in a sense, coding it, or changing it from one type of signal to another. See, that's one of the problems with digital. You're changing the music into just pulses, and so, and depending on how many pulses you have, 44.1, 96K, 192 or whatever, you're going to get a higher resolution and more accuracy. But at first it was only 44.1, and that's not very accurate. And it still is on CDs. But the thing that's good about CDs is that they haven't gone through a lot of processes down the road. They usually only go through one process, and it's linear digital. See, a lot of digital nowadays is compressed, and then it's expanded on the other end, and which degrades the sound. It's not quite as good. Mm-hmm. So if you do a lot of processing and copies and all of this stuff that a lot of people want to believe doesn't affect it, it does affect it. And I've proved it to everyone that's questioned it. I just sit them down and I'll say, okay, this one is the original, and this one's been copied 1 or 2 times, and everybody hears it when you can A/B it and really hear the difference. It just isn't a perfect medium, and we've been working on it. The industry's been working on it for 30, 40 years, and it keeps improving. But the problem is it's also gone backwards too, because streaming isn't as good as a CD.
Right.
Even if it's 96K, it's probably gone through a lot of processes to where that's been degraded. So the most straightforward thing is still, CDs are still a great all-around format because they're portable. And they do contain, if they're done properly, most of the sound. It's not quite as good as it could be if it was higher resolution, but because it hasn't gone through a lot of conversions and processes, it can be pretty good. But everybody ran away from it and went to iTunes and things like that, where those are inferior formats. iTunes is definitely inferior. It's not anywhere near as good as a CD, or things like that. I mean, streaming maybe is a little better, but I don't really even listen to streaming, because it's been compromised.
Wow.
So, the sound quality, it's always been this competition between quality and convenience.
Hmm.
And so people tend to gravitate toward convenience. And so they would rather just almost have things automatically just play things back for them on a playlist.
Right.
And then that's fine. Well, at least they get the music. I mean, I even like old Fats Waller records. They're not great quality. They're from 78s, but the music is fantastic.
You still can feel it. That was
Yeah,
yeah.
you can still get that, but it's just frosting on the cake. If you can really have great sound, it just is a bigger experience. That's
Right.
all. But the real fundamental stuff comes through. I remember when that single came out, "Oh Happy Day," with that choir, with that
Oh,
gospel
happy
choir.
day. Yeah.
I mean,
It,
the sound quality was very poor. It had a lot of tape hiss and all this, but man, the feeling just came right through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
that's something that's hard to stop. If something really is connected and it's very a human feeling. I
Okay.
mean, I've seen things. Look, I've seen things that are highly simplified that just floor you with the feeling. When I used to hang out at the Black Elks Club in South Phoenix. There was this truck driver that would come in. I was an old drummer too at one time,
Okay.
but this truck driver would come in and sit in on the drums, and all he would do is play time, and it was like shockingly good. Just playing time. It was like, what? How do you do that? I mean, it's simple in a way, basically, but boy, where does that feeling come from?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's just there, and and,
Some
and it's
people
like,
just got
and
it.
you just enjoy it.
Yeah.
And you don't need to know where it comes from. You just know that this guy is in touch with something
Mm-hmm.
that goes beyond your intellectual.
Interesting.
So, I mean, these kind of experiences, that's why I got out of playing drums. Because I worked on a rhythm and blues band in the Air Force when I was in the Air Force,
Okay.
and it was a black band, and I was the only white guy on the band, and I was the drummer.
Okay. And you held the drums down. Okay.
That's funny, isn't it? Yeah, because it's unusual. I was pretty good at playing time though, and every now and then we'd all be on the same wavelength, and we'd all look around at each other after a tune and go, "What happened?" You know. But the guy that ran the band was could also play drums, but he was like a Fats Domino type guy, and he played alto sax and he could sing, and he was out in front. But every now and then he would sit in playing drums, and I'd go out in the audience, and I would sit out there and I'd watch him, and he pretty much just played time. But I would think to myself, I can't do that. I can't make it feel like that just so easily. He just would sit up there and it would just swing. And so when I got out of the service, I never touched the drums again. I said, I'm going to be a recording engineer, and that's it. And I drove all the way from northeast Montana at a big SAC base up there. I was in electronic countermeasures. And I went all the way down to Hollywood, and I walked into Capitol. I walked into head of recording. I said, okay, what do I have to do? I want to be a recording engineer.
Huh.
And, I was pretty headstrong in those days. But
Wow.
and I actually ended up still going back to Phoenix and working in the studio there. That's how I got to meet some people from Hollywood and so forth, and eventually I got into LA. But I've got a very good old American story. I was just so passionate about it, so ambitious, and just so determined that everybody just kind of like said, "Okay."
Hey, that's a lot of the struggle, man. You believe
Well,
it,
it is.
they'll believe it too. Yeah.
Look, if you really are in touch with your emotion and your passion, I mean, if you have tremendous energy, and it's always there. So if you finally find that, no matter where it is, that it doesn't matter. I mean, parents get in the way sometimes because they want you to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, because they want you to be able to take care of yourself. But sometimes it gets in the way of what your real passion is. And if you finally can find your real passion and tap into it, you're going to have energy that won't quit. And people are going to see that. They're going to feel it when they're around you.
Some people needed to hear that for sure. And
I try to help people do that. to just kind of like relax and try to feel what's the thing that you always notice and always attracts you and always goes right to you. Uh, Remember those things. I mean, get around that stuff. That's the stuff that's going to open you up.
Wow. You telling that story about you being a drummer in that band, I can actually understand how you are able to hear all these different types of music. Just for me, that makes a lot of sense in context of what you do, because you were able to be in that band and you could actually see what it is you could do versus what that other drummer did. And you can hear, I think you have that, obviously you have that ear.
Well, I was being honest with myself too. I was thinking, in order to do that, and even to play the way I would really prefer, which is bebop jazz, which is really difficult, I thought, I really don't want it that bad. You find out how bad you want something. It's self-limiting, something like music, because it's obvious whether you're good or not, or you're able to do what you want to do. It's obvious. Same way with sports. Those areas, you're either going to be able to do it or not. And if you can't, and if you don't want to do the woodshedding and the work that it takes to do it, then you shouldn't be doing it.
Right. Go sit down.
Yeah.
Go commentate
or something. Hey, it's all right.
Yeah.
So, this is what I realized, and I knew that my original passions were all about audio and just listening and enjoying music. And so I thought, well, that's a natural. I mean, I knew that was my natural. That was my first love anyway, were things like that. I was just playing drums because I was just always fascinated with drummers and what they could do. But I mean, look, there was a Mary J. Blige thing that I did a few years ago for like a big convention of all the penny stores or something. And she performed, and I was doing the video for it. And I was doing the music, the mastering for the music. And Mary J. Blige was standing up there, and they started this tune. And there was this big black drummer in the back. And he started out, he just went wham, on an accent at the beginning. And it was like almost like the whole world came down. It was so right. And so it had a thing that I don't know how it was just one hit. But it just like shocked everyone into feeling what was going to happen. It was the most amazing thing. Just that one hit. It was just like, oh my God.
Interesting. So you hear things in songs and you're even like, whoa. Like,
oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. No. I mean, when it's there, it's there. It's like Quincy says too. Quincy says, hey, when it happens, what are you going to do? And it's just there, and you feel it.
Man, let's go back to some Prince here, and so
Sure.
we're in a time where vinyl and reissues. I guess like taking even the older albums and reissuing them on vinyl is a very big thing these days. Of course, with the Prince stuff now is the thing to go back and to re-release these albums with the unreleased materials added to them. There's always been an album by Prince fans or by Prince that Prince fans. So man, it was always too low. Like the sound of this whole album was just like you had to turn it up compared to the other albums. And that album was Sign of the Times.
Oh, really?
Yes, that was a thing with the Prince fans. Like we love that album, but you listen to it amongst the other stuff, and it's like, what's going on? Like it seems like it's just low in overall sound. So I'm
not sure. Now, see, the problem is, what are they just listening to it on a CD or on a vinyl?
It could be. I think in more normal times of today, it would have probably been more CD. And CD started with the CD. I think with the CD release was where that talk started to happen.
It's really hard to say what happens because sometimes some of the subsequent releases, when they re-release stuff and so forth, it's done by somebody else, or they.
Okay.
It's hard to say. I don't know. I would have to research that. But if it's vinyl, there is a problem with vinyl.
Really?
Vinyl's so physical that you can only put so much time on a disc.
Okay.
And you can only put and the thing that takes up space on a disc is bottom end. So if you have anything that's got a lot of bottom punch and so forth, you're not going to be able to make a loud record if it's long. if the sides are long. And a lot of CDs started getting kind of long for vinyl. And so we do run into the problem of having to cut things at lower levels. But here's an interesting factor about vinyl, though. They might be comparing it to, say, a different disc, like another release of Prince's, and say this one's lower than the other.
Mm-hmm.
But in vinyl, the lower the level, the cleaner the sound.
Okay.
Because think of it, it's mechanical. The more radical that groove, the harder it is to track it. So if it's a lower level, it's going to be easier to track, and you're going to be able to get cleaner sound. However, the one drawback is if you go too low, you've got a certain amount of surface noise on a vinyl. You know, it's like tape hiss. It's a similar thing. There's a certain kind of noise floor that is always there. So if you go too low on level, you'll get close to that noise floor, and that'll bother you maybe. Okay. So you don't want to go too low. But if you try it, we used to make records too hot, actually. Because if we made them, that was just for commercial reasons, for competitive reasons. But I never believed in it because the sound wasn't as clean. And you had to have a better cartridge all the time to at least get it somewhat clean. But most people don't have expensive cartridges. So, I mean, I'm not a big believer in loud vinyl.
Okay.
And in fact, even when we do all this competitive stuff on digital, we're using all these digital processors, or we're using compressors and limiters and things like that. That all degrades the quality. But it's not all about quality. I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that it's a balance. You do need to use some of these processors because they make things sound, they increase the average level so that you've got a little more energy always there. And so with some pop things, that's important. It's more important than the loss of quality. So it's always this judgment that a mastering engineer has to make between are we getting more from this processing we're doing than we're losing? Because you're going to lose quality-wise, but you might pick up a better feeling for that music.
Right.
So if you made pop music like say a classical music or a jazz record, if you just were an audiophile and you were just trying to only get the perfect sound of those instruments, pop music would just lay there. It wouldn't be as exciting, I don't think.
Interesting.
Because you need to manipulate that in such a way that it's really coming at you all the time. And so it's just more exciting that way. It helps it. The electronics and the manipulation many times helps the stuff be more effective.
I see what you're saying.
There's no rule. There's no rule in pop music at all. I mean, you can do anything you want. It doesn't matter if the quality is getting lost or something. If it feels better and more exciting, that's what counts. You have to service, like Swedin always said, you have to service the music. You're not only just thinking about quality, because if you only think about quality, it probably won't be that good. It's the overall experience and how it hits you. And that could be a little degradation in sound, but it's going to be it's the musical experience that you're looking for, the most effective musical experience.
Okay. Well, with that said, then, with this Sign of the Times project, what is like, and just to be clear for the listeners, because a lot of time, they promote these projects and they'll say remastered, and I think sometimes people think that may be remixed, and I don't think they're remixing these records. Are they? Like
most of them? No, they're not.
So what goes into the process of how do you remaster something, your previous work? Like, what makes a difference? How do you change that? Is that saying there's something wrong with the previous version?
Well, sometimes the remastering, because we have better equalizers, they're a little cleaner and so forth, and we have maybe better, if it was a digital recording, we have better converters now, going through, the D to A converters and things like that. We have some better equipment now, and we can actually get our cake and eat it too. In other words, we can make it really basically like it was, except it's just more detailed and cleaner, but it still can still have the same processing and all that, so it wouldn't change that much. But the remastering also can take advantage of the whole process all the way down the line. That's been improved over the years, because like I was saying earlier, digital has been in a process for decades of getting better and better and better, and also worse and worse and worse, depending on where it's going. But
Right.
the capability is there for it to actually be better than it was maybe back when it was originally released. So we're trying to actually do that. Like we did the whole U2 catalog. I didn't do it. One of my other engineers did, but they tried to uh, kind of get what was on those original half-inch 30 IPS master tapes.
Mm.
And on the blogs, everybody was shocked at hearing way more in the mixes than they had ever heard before.
Okay.
So, I mean, there are improvements that we can make in the remastering, especially if vinyl. Vinyl on average is better than it's ever been, because it came out of the resurgence of vinyl came out of audiophile people, because they've always liked vinyl. They like the sound of vinyl. So I started back in the mid 90s with one of these companies. I did hundreds of albums for the audiophile market, and it made the plants do better and work harder to make better vinyl pressings, because those people demanded it. And so it's still kind of there. The standards have gone up. So on average, vinyl is better than it's ever been.
Would you recommend, like, say I was going to go buy the new Prince re-release or whatever, would you say I would get the best sound if I went and got the vinyl version or the CD?
Well, it depends, because here's what happens. Let me tell you something that happens, and people just don't know this. But what happens is, a lot of times when they want us to remaster something, I'm not sure whether we try to let them know that we really need to go back to the original, especially a lot of that stuff that Prince did was on tape.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to get them to release the master tape. Right. And that's where the best quality is. See, they'll send us like a digital copy.
That was my next question too. So I'm glad you're going
they'll send us either a digital copy or they'll make a tape copy of the original tape. Well, it's never going to be as good in that respect. But we could go back over it and maybe come up with maybe a more effective EQ. It does happen. We try to. We're trying to actually make it even better than it was, if it's possible. And even with a little degradation from it being a generation down that we're working from, it is possible to just put some new thinking on it, and maybe actually finding, because you always are in this funny feeling a lot of times and that's why it takes so long sometimes to even mix things. It's like, have we gotten everything that we possibly can get out of this recording? Mm-hmm. Have we tried everything? And it's a big trial and error thing. And people think that we just go in and we just listen to it. We know what to do. We don't always know what to do. We know what might make it better, but when we try it, we don't even like it ourselves. So we have to keep trial and error, but we have to keep that vision of what's going on out of those speakers. Are we really getting it better? Because one of the problems with a lot of engineers nowadays is they're drunk with technology. Mm. They got their heads so buried in the computer, and they love all of the little plugins that keep the pitch right and keep the tempo right and keep this right and that right, that they strangle the life out of it. They're not even listening to what they're doing to the music. Mm. So all of that stuff's important. You still are serving the music. That's the key thing, is, can we make this thing even better? And that's what we try to do. And so the perception is, when they reissue these things, is that we've done that. But it isn't always true.
Interesting.
So, it's a very difficult business in that way, to really get in touch with this music and try to really do justice to it.
Let me ask you this. Do you feel, I'm not naming specific releases, but are you feel confident that, I did, I don't know, did I bring something else to this that I did from 30 years ago? Or, you know what I mean? Like, do you feel like...
I think we are. The reason why is that we have done a lot of work through the. See, we're different than a lot of people in that we build most of this equipment. We even build our own. What drives our cutting system, and the signal path of that cutting system has been worked on many times, and it's only done to the ear. We don't just say, well, this new preamp or whatever is better because the specs are better. No, we don't go by that. We always go by what we hear, because that's the last thing that really tells you whether it's better or not. And we always compare to what we had before. And we have a better system than we had, say, 10 years ago.
Okay.
And it cuts a better record. So we can improve, especially in vinyl. But you see a lot of stuff in digital, it just goes into streaming services, and that's inferior again.
Right. When you just to go back on Prince again, did you master projects from him that were never released? Do you have any remembrance of doing things like that?
I don't think so. Yeah, he was so prolific, though. It is possible. I think there were some things that he didn't release, but I could do an album for Prince and sending him refs back and forth from Minneapolis. That's the way we would work a lot of times. He wasn't with me, but I would do a new ref with some changes he might want. And after we get done mastering and getting things approved of an album, within a week or two, he'd have another one. I mean, and it wasn't all completely done, but he'd want me to go over it and start sending him refs on that one.
Oh, interesting.
And it's like, wow, this guy, does he live in his basement or what? I mean, he definitely was one of those people that was just so obsessed with, doing his art. I mean, he was an unusual person that way, but he was very shy. He never talked much. Very shy.
Was there ever a project or something that he may have had a more sort of like, man, this is the one, Bernie, or somebody down the chain told you like this is a really important one that you work on? Was there anything like that ever happened?
No, I don't know about that. It's just that we knew we had really good stuff. It stands out. It's funny how that happens, but like when I go back, I remember experiencing things like that with other artists too. Like when Carole King's Tapestry came in for me to master. Now that was a huge album.
Okay.
Now, of course, I didn't know it was going to be huge, but when I put that tape on, there was just something there. It's unexplainable, but something came through that just grabbed you. That there was some kind of sentiment, some way she was singing something, and it was very simple. That album, there wasn't much to it at all, but it was just really good. Same way with Prince. That stuff would come in, and it's like, damn, this is this guy really knows what he's doing. I mean, he really has a certain brand of music that's unique and sticks out.
Wow.
So, I mean, he's just one of those people. It's just like, how do you explain it?
It goes back to that feel, I guess you said. He just has it, right?
Yeah, it's just, he's just so dedicated, and but he has the ability to express what he's feeling through music, and that takes a certain knowledge and technique too, and he could play all those instruments.
Right.
I mean, it's like he had it covered in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, some of that stuff was just really great. I mean, just I like his older stuff the most.
Okay.
Because it felt better, I think. Same way with Michael. The stuff that Quincy did felt the best. It swung the most. One of the problems nowadays is we use a lot of machines that they've kind of helped be a little more natural or human. But the thing that they got into for a while, and it's a little better now, but I'm saying after all of those first albums that all came out with Prince and Michael and all that, everybody wanted to try to get feel by just playing harder, just by playing the accents harder. and that isn't really it doesn't have the real nuance of feel. It's just power, and it has something, but it doesn't have that thing that were on his first 3 albums all the way up to Bad, with Michael, with Off the Wall and Thriller. I mean, that had a feel that Quincy gave it because he's an old jazz guy.
Mm-hmm.
But and same with Prince is an old jazz guy particularly. But boy, those first albums with Sheila E. and stuff like that, they were the feeling on it was fantastic, all the way up through Purple Rain. Yeah, he just had that way of making the thing feel good. And that's a big thing for me, is that it feels good.
The feeling of it. Let me ask you this, because you won a Grammy. Well, one of the Grammys you won was for the speaker box Love Below. The Outcasts.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah, those guys were. Yeah, that's Andre 3000 and yeah, Big Boy. Yeah,
man.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, that was an interesting album too, and that even had a jazz thing in it.
Yeah.
So in fact, Andre, I actually turned Andre on to bebop jazz.
Really?
I gave him some CDs, some old Sonny Rollins CDs, some of the better Sonny Rollins CDs, which is my favorite tenor player.
Interesting.
And because he was really interested, and he didn't know a lot about jazz.
Did you do his? Was it the School of 3000? It was like he had a solo thing when it was for a TV show.
No, I don't think
you guys didn't do that. It had a lot of jazz stuff on it, which is make me think that.
Yeah, no, he got. I wouldn't be surprised that he got more and more into jazz.
Okay. Well, I was bringing them up, and then like Doctor, what was the first hip hop project that you guys did there, mastered? Do you remember?
Well, I don't know. It's the problem with mastering is you do 200, 250 albums a year.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to keep track of all this stuff.
Gotcha.
And people will come up to me and say, like, I even did a box set of who was it? James Taylor.
Okay.
Recently, I did a six album box set of remastering, and all my notes were in the master boxes. And I thought, God, I didn't realize I did so many of his albums. I don't even remember. I knew I did some, but I didn't know I did most of them. That's how crazy it gets, because I've done so many albums, Brothers Johnson, whatever. It's like, but it's all been fun.
Hey, Bernie. With companies like Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs, when they do a remaster, and sometimes I don't know if they do some of your work, but if they do, are you involved with that as well?
No, I wouldn't be involved in something if another mastering place was doing something. I probably wouldn't have anything to do with it. It would just be what the record company or whoever's releasing it, because a lot of times they're independent companies that just license the album for audiophile purposes.
Oh.
And they just license it, and so they get the master tape or or a copy of the master, and it goes to whoever guy they use to do the transfer, and then they decide how to do it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's hard to say. It could vary a lot.
Now, with this upcoming Prince project, I read somewhere that, and I'm just quoting, so it may be inaccurate, but I read that you were editing it or mastering it in 24/192. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we do of course, when it comes out, it's not 192 unless you're in a high res streaming service. But we make we run all the way up to 192 in a lot of these transfers and masterings. But a lot of these recordings, the thing about digital is, a lot of these recordings were originally done digitally, and so and those sampling rates are low, so we're not going to really make it really any better, or not almost imperceptibly better, if we change it to 192. It doesn't help, because once it's, say, 44.1, that's what it is. You're not going to make it any better. That kind of limits what it has. Whereas if we were able to get the analog tape, compared to, say, the first CDs that were put out, the 192 would be better, because the analog tape doesn't have that limitation that 44.1 has. If it's a good analog recording, it's limitless. I mean, it doesn't really have any cutoff in the high frequencies or anything, and the accuracy of the high frequencies is better, because those low sampling rate recordings, that's where they suffer the most, is in the high frequencies, because those high frequency signals are not sampled very well. There's just not enough pulses that measure that waveform. Whereas 192, at least you've got more pulses, but it still isn't as good as an analog tape.
Okay. Going back to vinyl quickly, I noticed that the Sign of the Times project is going to be in 180 gram vinyl. Now, I'm getting slowly reacquainted with vinyl myself. Does that really make a difference?
A little bit. It's not a big deal. It's just a thicker record. And what it does is it cuts down on vibration, for one thing, and it's easier to press it really flat. So that there's, you know how records sometimes your playback is bouncing on the outer edge, especially. You know, it's just a little bit warped out there, because when they actually manufacture it, they have to trim it, and sometimes it puts a little crimp in it. So it tends to have a little bit of a bounce there. Well, it's more steady. But see, you even get with vinyl, you can get feedback right through your cartridge from the turntable if your speakers are close to the turntable. So because it's almost like a little microphone, the cartridge. So what happens is, if you get vibration in that disc, it feeds back into a signal that you don't want into the cartridge. So it's a little better from that standpoint. You know, it's a more solid piece of vinyl that doesn't vibrate as much, won't be as susceptible to any kind of acoustical vibrations or anything like that. And it will be probably flatter. So it does have advantages.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask this, and you know, we'll kind of wrap up here, but in today's sort of climate, whatever record companies are left, do they still put a heavy sort of interest or on getting these albums mastered? Is there, you know what I mean? Is there still a lot? Is that something that's a very big thing in the industry, or are they just put it out?
What are you talking about? New product?
Like newer stuff, yeah.
Oh no, we still go through a whole process of working with the artist and the producer, and it's the same as before, except that the budgets tend not to be as high. You know, it's not quite as good as it used to be. It used to be the sky was the limit. It didn't matter. Nobody cared, because there was so much money in the industry when that was the primary entertainment medium, were CDs and vinyl and stuff like that. Now, because they have to share so many of the profits and stuff with iTunes and with Spotify and all these different streaming services, they don't, the budget, they're a little more strict on, they just kind of try to influence you not to go crazy on the cost. But still, it's a producer's medium, and if they feel they need to spend more time with it and go back in the studio and remix something and do this and do that, we still do a lot of that. Okay. But we tend to be a little more efficient and a little more cost conscious. But there still is a lot of back and forth and so forth with the artist and the producer, and they come in and it's that part of it at the start, when you're first putting out a record, they still want it to have the best chance to become successful.
Okay. And has there been any? Have you guys done any work in like movies or games and stuff like that? Oh, okay.
Oh yeah. Well, I have one of my engineers. We have a female engineer, and she's got a whole niche there. She does a lot of games, music for games.
Okay.
She masters it.
Nice.
And so she does all the adjustments to what they want, also to fit with where it's going to go. But she spends a lot of time with some of that stuff, getting the levels right and getting the sound right. We do. It's usually just the soundtrack version that comes out on audio. We don't really do it for the movie. if we're working on a movie or something.
Okay.
If we're working on a soundtrack, it's usually destined only for that release, for the audio release, for either streaming or for CDs or vinyl even. But it doesn't really go. We're not doing it. We're not doing the mastering for the movie. Okay. Only in a few cases, like if it's going to be a music video, we do. Now, if it's going to be a music video, we might do the whole 5.1 and everything.
Oh, really? Okay. Would you ever be interested into, like, if Marvel came to you and said, "Hey, Bernie, I want you guys to do our next big Marvel movie"?
Well, I mean, we do whatever, we're just an independent company. And so whatever we can do, we will do. Okay. I even do every year, I do the Christmas album of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
All right, okay.
and that's all surround sound. And it's all, very high end stuff, with that big choir and all that stuff. But, they come in and they hire us because they like our sound. They like what we can do. And they want the best quality, and we feel we're right up there. So they come to us every year, and we do their whole Christmas show.
All right, and you have, and I don't think I said it. I mean, you have your own studio. You guys are in Hollywood, and you have a team of other engineers and stuff here.
We have 17 people here or something. We have about 5 engineers that are pretty busy all the time.
Man, you guys are an institution. Like, your name rings out, man. Like,
we're also in Tokyo,
That's right. Wow.
Yeah, we have a studio there too.
Wow. Did you ever thought you would have like a studio in a different country?
I never thought that. No, I'm that way. I'm pretty conservative in a lot of ways. I'm kind of insecure actually about doing something like that. But all of these things have happened from outside pressures. People encouraging me, hey man, you should open your own studio. You should do this. You should do that because you're doing all these hit records and so then you get thinking and say, God, maybe I could do that. But and I did, and it's been very successful. So I mean, I'm fortunate that way. But the Tokyo thing was interesting because we had this one guy that came in years ago, 20 years ago, Japanese kid, young. He was working at one of the studios as a second engineer. But he came in and he told me, and I've never heard this before, he said, I've always only wanted to be a mastering engineer. And I thought, God, I've never heard anyone say that they only wanted to be a mastering engineer. Usually people want to be a mixer and they want to be more in a glamorous position with the artist and stuff and working on the actual making of the music. And he wanted to just come and sit with me and just see what I did every Saturday when I would come in and just do cleanup work and stuff. And so he was there. And pretty soon we needed a night guy, a night assistant for one of my other engineers, and we hired him. And then he started working on me about putting a studio in Tokyo. And that's how it all came about. Eventually we built him a studio because he was so ambitious.
Wow.
But we don't speak Japanese. And we don't, it's...
how often do you go out there?
I don't go there much anymore. It just kind of runs itself. He's in charge of it. We also do Blu-ray authoring there too. We do some video work there too. So we have 2 floors of this office building.
Wow. Now, do you have kids or family and stuff?
Like, I've been married for 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah, that's unusual in this business.
That's unusual, period.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of casualties. But no, I have a son and a daughter, and my son's married and has 2 kids, and
awesome.
I'm a grandfather.
Awesome. Okay.
So
you did all right. You did all right.
It's worked out for me. I mean, I have to say though that I was in there in the good old battle days that I call the 70s and stuff, when there's a lot of temptations, a lot of people doing cocaine, a lot of staying up 3 days on end that these engineers was dragging, and it was pretty excessive. The entertainment industry can be really excessive, and I used to work too much, and so it was hard on my marriage at times because I was working all the time. So it can get you. And it really is a chore to try to balance your life. And when you're younger, you tend to go too far sometimes in one area or the other. But you're also trying to be successful. and trying to make a name for yourself. So it's really hard at the beginning, because I was doing 16-hour days all the time.
Wow.
And go home and sleep for 4 hours and go right back to work.
What was the thing that changed that for you, where you realized, like, I got to have a balance?
I mean, well, getting more successful, I was able to get assistants to do the follow-up work. All I had to do was sit down and EQ it and set it up, and then they would run it and make the masters and do all of that stuff. I was able to hire more people to assist me. So that's how it helped that. And also the fact that I knew that it was a little too hard on everyone. And I couldn't spend enough time with my family and all that. So that typical story. Quincy says the same thing. That's what he regrets. He didn't spend much time with his kids.
Mm.
So, that's important too. And of course, as you get older, you realize that that's one of the most important things, your interpersonal relationships.
Right. All right. Last thing I'll ask, we'll wrap it on session over. Any words for the budding, for a kid that wants to be an engineer, today, or getting into this? Like, what path should they get on? Is there something they should start to learn, or should they just listen to the music like you did?
Well, I mean, you should be a good listener, because you need to have kind of some sort of experience. What I tell people in my seminars, because I give seminars, I used to, I haven't done that for a while, but I tell them that, you need to develop this ability, to manipulate the sound to improve the experience. And the thing that a lot of them don't realize that what I said earlier was that what you're really trying to do is, and I pose it to them. I say, look, you're sitting at the console and somebody brings you in a piece of music. You don't even know what it is necessarily. You put it up on the speakers. How do you know what to do? And I stop and I just say, how do you know what to do? You just make it loud? Is that mastering? I mean, you put compressors. How do you know what to do? So, in other words, what you need to know is that you have to have some sort of idea of where that music can go. You might even have to try manipulating it a little bit, but you have to be focused on what you're doing to the feeling of it. Are you really making this thing come alive more, connect with you? But you're the one that has to use yourself. You have to be not prejudiced to whatever music comes in. You wouldn't know what to do if you're prejudiced, because you won't like it. You don't even want to hear it. So that's one thing that I learned too, is you better not be prejudiced to the music or some type of music. You should be able to get on that emotional waveform or wave that music has, because you're a human being just like that person you're working with. And there's no reason why you can't get on that wavelength and get in touch with what they're trying to do emotionally, because it's all an expression of a human being's emotion. And you should be able to get in touch with it and maybe enhance it and improve it, but you have to use yourself to know if you're getting anywhere. So when you turn a knob and change the EQ or whatever, you have to also understand whether or not you're actually making yourself feel better. And so this is one of the key things that I try to teach people, is that you can develop this. You just have to listen to a lot of music, and you have to get an idea of what is the best of hip hop, what's the best of polka music, Hawaiian music, I don't care. What's the best of bebop? What's the best of rock and roll? What are some of the records that you've heard? And you have to listen to a whole bunch of stuff. You have to know the ones that really stand out. If you listen to a lot of things in one area like hip hop, the really great ones are going to start standing out. You're going to know what a really great hip hop record does, how it feels, how it was mixed, all the things that it had that make it so special. Now, when somebody else brings in a hip hop record, you've got that as an ideal in your mind, how good it can actually be. And then you try to make that one come up to that level of quality and communication. And you might not be able to, but you at least know where you would like it to go. You have to have an ideal. You have to have an idea of what a really great one of that kind of music sounds like. Does that make sense?
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
You could use that philosophy just in life in general, dealing with people.
No, you can.
Right? Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it opens up your whole world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there really is no reason to be prejudiced.
Right.
We're all human beings. We're all the same.
Man, are you running for president? Like, what the other Bernie?
Yeah, well, I mean, we do need that. Oh yeah, let's not get into that.
Are you voting for Bernie? Yeah, Bernie Grundman.
Yeah, I'm Bernie. I remember when Bernie Sanders started to get up. When I saw those bumper stickers years ago, I thought, hey, I finally made it.
Awesome, man. Mr. Grundman, listen, very much appreciate you spending time. Man, such a wealth of knowledge, experience. I wish that I can only aspire to be able to just be into music this long and to be able to understand all the different genres and appreciate it all. That's beautiful that you do that. Your ear has blessed a lot of us over the years. So I hope you know that. And we appreciate the work that you.
Well, thank you for the compliment. That's really nice to hear, because that's why I'm in it, and I've been in it that long, and I'm still here.
That's right. That's right. Still top demand, man. That says a lot.
Yeah, let me co-sign what Mike said. Bernie, it's great, and it's just so humbling that you have your fingerprints over this entire industry, and you're such a accessible, friendly, yet knowledgeable cat, man. I really appreciate you coming on with us today.
Well, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed speaking about this. I do this all the time, but I haven't been doing it as much, but it is fun to always talk about it and kind of go back over what actually is going on. Because, years ago, when people at first asked me to do a seminar, and I thought, God, I don't know anything. I don't have much to talk about. I don't know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? You didn't quite have it. Hadn't really thought about how to put it into words, what you do, or to how you explain it to somebody.
Right.
But I took the first seminar and I put down some pointers and things. But then I realized I was talking for 4 or 5 hours. And I thought, damn, there's a lot of stuff here that they don't know, or they've never thought about, and that they need to think about, and that I've just started to try to verbalize. Because sometimes you just do things like a lot of those bebop jazz musicians. They couldn't even read music, but they played fantastic stuff. It's just that it was just part of them, and they didn't realize that. I don't think they realized that they never put it into words or tried to figure out exactly how to describe it to somebody. And so that's what I had to start thinking about. How am I going to get this across to help people do it?
Right. Well, no, this is the way, man. Storytelling and sharing the experiences is how we keep this thing going. And with that said, shout out to all the listeners, supporters of the show, Podcast Juice and Podcast on Prince. And once again, thank you to Bernie Grundman. Shout out to Big Sexy and Sack. As I always say at this time, work it like a job. We'll see you next time. Peace.